2 weeks ago, we made this really cool GUI for DaVinci Resolve, and we didn't quite give it functionality yet. Today, let's make this thing actually work. We're gonna make this image video importer that will take an entire folder of images, videos, or audio, bring that folder into the specified bin in Resolve, and bring all of the contents of that in seconds. Let's get to it. All right, the last thing we did in the last episode was we made this little function that will loop through all of our bins and add all the bins from the media pool into our drop-down list so the user can choose what bin the folder is going to go into. Today, let's go and start with making the browse button work. This is going to be pretty easy, but let's go ahead and take a look at some of the more interesting things we have to write up to make this work. To start, I'm going to start making some comments in the code to help us lay out what different things are. So starting right here, we're going to do a multi-line comment, which is written out like this, and we're just going to add 2 lines to the end just to make it fancy. And inside of here, we're just going to write down GUI user interaction. This is going to happen whenever any user touches any of these buttons or elements of our GUI. So whenever the window is closed, this is when a user clicks the X, and then it's going to exit the loop. Let's make one that detects whenever the user presses the button, which if we look at this function for closing, the actual format of these is pretty easy. We just have to write out function main window dot on dot, and then we have to put out the name of the element or the ID of the element, and we know that it's going to be browse. So we scroll up here, we have browse, and then we have to do dot clicked since it's a button, and then we can do it parentheses EV to get the event. If you don't know what EV means, I mentioned it in the last video. It basically is just saying take what element the event was triggered on. So it's going to take this. It's going to take main window dot browse. So if we type in EV, we're calling to that browse object and not to the specified click event. It'll make a little more sense when we talk about trees, because then we can get very specific with what we can see that the user is touching. So we'll talk about that later. For now, let's just make a button do something. So we want to get the user's chosen path. And to do that, we need to ask for a directory or a folder. So we need to set a variable, local. We'll just say folder path, and we'll set that equal to view request dir for directory, and then we can have parentheses, and we're going to make this a multi-line object. We're going to type in 2 parentheses. This is the folder and name of the file. So in this instance, it's just whatever folder you're opening it up into. If this was requesting a file, and you can choose to save file as an option for that, and we'll get to that also in another video. But if we put in a directory path, then it will take the user to that directory. Now, there's no built-in downloads directory that we can get from Fusion, but Fusion does have a few other things called mapped paths or path maps or map paths. They call it a couple different things. Sometimes they swap them, sometimes they don't, but map path is generally what you're going to look for. Don't get it confused with Matt Pat from game theory. He's something else. But let's just say for my specific user, let's open up my downloads folder. Go up to here, and we're actually going to right click on one of these items. We're just going to right click on Lua, come down here to copy as path. And then here, I'm just going to paste this in as a string. And we can see, if we get rid of the Lua folder, we can see we have the downloads folder. So let's go ahead and put this into here, but we have to do something special to actually make this work. We can do forward slashes instead of backslashes because Windows by default uses backslashes, but most coding languages don't accept just a backslash since that's a call function for strings. So if you want to do a new line, it's /n. If you want to do a new tab, it's /t. So it's a problem with Windows, you have to always switch it over, which is something we're going to talk about here in a second. If we take this file path now, and we'll just take it straight out these quotation marks, we'll just delete these, and we'll shove it in here. When we launch this, it's going to take me to the downloads folder, and we'll show this in just a second. Make a comma here because we're adding another entry into this multi-object line thing, and then we're going to add some parentheses. Some curly brackets even. And these are going to open up a table, and these can be a bunch of different items or indexes or flags, whatever you want to call them. And this is essentially saying what is this specifically going to do? What are the aspects of this window requesting the directory? We're gonna give it a name or a title. By default, it might just say File Explorer in the top left, or choose file, or choose folder, but we want to give it its special name. So in the top left, we want to have it say something for the user. And to do that, we're just gonna do FR, both capital, and then EQ, both lowercase, and then we're gonna do S, capital, underscore, capital T for title, and rest of title. And that's equals to, and we can choose the name. So we're just gonna say choose containing folder. We'll put 3 dots just to give the user some pause, I guess. We can put a comma there, we can take it off. It doesn't matter. This is the only entry we're gonna actually have, so the comma's not needed. This is gonna just create a variable of whatever folder the user chooses. Oh, now if we come down here, we can call item, since that is what we're calling all the get items from up here. We're gonna do item.file path. This is the ID of the text, the line edit that we made that's going to actually display the file path for the user. Then we're just going to do .text. Then we're going to set that equal to the folder path text. And we're going to do one more thing just to ensure that our directory is coming in as a string. Sometimes things can be messed up with that. I've experienced some issues with this in the past. So we're just going to do toString at the front, and then at the back of it, we're going to put another parenthesis. If we want to, we can even set in an if. So we can say if there is folder path, then we can do this. And this is just going to catch an exception. If the user closes this window, it's not going to try to add it to the text field. It will just ignore it and move on. So let's go ahead and open this up and test this out now. And if we press browse, it's going to bring us into my downloads folder, because that's what I asked it to do. And we have on the top left, it says choose containing folder ... Everything that we specified has been done. This is perfect. What we want to do, just to double check that this is working, if we go into a different directory and just either press cancel or select folder, we'll just select folder. Well, first off, we can see it has taken a shorthand of the documents folder. This will not look like the same thing for you. It'll look like your actual documents file path. Same thing whenever we see the downloads file path. It's different for me because in the development of the macro creator, I am adding in your default paths for downloads and directories, or downloads and documents, so that I'm able to easily call for those later on. So it's a little bit less writing for me. And you then have access to having easy access to those documents or those directories if you just type that in. But we can see it comes in like that. But now if we press browse again, we're going to see it brings us into the downloads folder, even though our last folder we had open was documents. If we did not have, so if we take this out right now and run this test real quick, we run the tutorial file, we hit browse, it's going to take us to documents because our last opened folder in these choose folder options was document. Let's just keep this in here because it's really handy. Most likely they're going to have it in either the downloads or directories. So that's where most people are going to store their images to bring directly into Fusion. But they can always choose wherever they want. That's why they have the choose option. All right, that's pretty much everything we have to do about whenever somebody interacts with stuff besides when they click on run. Because everything else is just a field they enter or a box they choose. So what we have to do now is whenever they press run, what do we do? Well, first we have to get whenever they press it. So we can just copy this, paste it here, and then just change this to run, because that's what we call our button. First off, let's get the files inside of the folder. So we can just do local files, so I can spell local right, files is equal to, and we're gonna call something that we made in the last video. Let's scroll up to the top and let's look at the one thing we're not using, media storage. Let's use this right now. So media storage is the access to the regular folder system. This is how you're able to read the folders and files straight in Resolve and get the data to be used within Resolve super easy. So let's go ahead and use this right now. And we're gonna do media storage, get file list, and we're going to give it the directory, which is just going to be this string. This is just going to return all of the files that we're going to need to have, meaning all the file paths. Now let's go ahead and just get whatever bin the user wants. So we're just going to make another variable and we'll call this user bin. So just the user's bin. And we're going to get it from item.bins.current text. We can also put current index, and this will give us the number that the entry is. This is going to act the exact same way as if you try to get the current number of the combo box control from macros. If you want to use this method, you totally can. Kind of makes it harder to read sometimes, so I prefer doing getting the text, because that way you can just read it in plain human text, and it's way easier to actually like tell what you need to do. Next up, we need to check if user bin is equal to master bin, because we need to set a variable called import bin. We want this equal to root bin. Root bin is the metadata of the master bin that we have stored up here. So we're going to talk about what import bin is here in a second, but we're just going to need this for something here in a minute. And then we need to check else if it's not master bin, then we need to get import bin from a function. And we're going to get it from a function called find bin. And we're just going to get the bins table and user bin. So this is the text of whatever the user has chosen as the bin, and this is getting the table of all the bins. So let's go ahead and just take this, copy it, and we're going to go all the way up to the top above everything up here, and we're actually going to put it above the GUI calls, or the GUI handling. And then up here before the functions, we're going to just say all of these are helper functions. All right, what do we have to do to find the bin that's called user bin? Something very important to specify before we start writing this out. Multiple bins can be called the same thing, so this is not foolproof. If you have two bins called the exact same thing, it'll just go to the first bin it sees in the list, which is going to be the first one it sees on your list going down. Make sure that whatever bin you want the user to send it to is called something different. You can probably write in an exception to see if two bins are called the same thing. That'll cause you to write out some more code, but I'd like to see you guys experiment with that. We're going to for loop through all of our bins again. So we're going to for, and we're going to not use this first number, so we're going to make that an underscore. Bin in I pairs, bins. And then we're going to say to do, and we're going to have name is set equal to bin get name. You can do this with quite a lot of things in Fusion, I've noticed, so definitely use this if you need to get the name of something, or dot name usually works too. There's a lot of different ways to get names. Then we also have to get the sub bins, and even if the bin doesn't have sub bins, we still want to get this, because this is how we're checking if the bin has sub bins. So just like how I did before, just up here, we're going to get the subfolder list, and we're going to check to see if name is equal to user bin, which means if this current bin that's been selected is the bin that the user wants, then let's return with that bin. So return here is going to basically turn this function into a variable giver. Returning bin will give the metadata version of the bin that has been selected by the user, if there's not multiple bins, which you can do that on your own. And this is just going to return that information back to that call when that function was called specifically. Because functions can be called multiple times. They can have different variables each time they're called. And it all depends on the stuff you can give it up here. All right, if it is not equal to bin, we're just gonna move on and check if the number of items in sub bins is greater than 0, then let's do something. Let's make the result equal to, we're going to do another find bins, and we're going to do sub bins is our table of bins now, and we're going to set our search function or our search string as user bin again. We're getting sub bins from right here, so if this bin does have sub bins, then we're going to look through that sub bins and see if it matches. So this is saying if it is equal to the name, the return, and return stops everything else from happening below it. So if this happens, this is never even called in the first place. We can say if result, then return result. And now this might be a tiny bit confusing, but what this is doing is calling find bins again. And if it is returning this bin, which is becoming this variable result, this is getting confusing now because we're inside of the same function. But if this function that we're in returns as a matching bin to this result function, If there is a result, then we're going to return result, which is essentially just saying this, but with a couple of extra steps, because we have to do iterative looping through these sub bins. This is where things can get a tiny bit confusing for people who don't understand, I guess, code logic in general. So definitely read up on some concepts, practice some really basic things, and I think you'll start getting a hang of this idea. If you've already got it, great. Let's go back down to our function whenever the user clicks on run. So now we have the imported bin. We know which bin they need to put those folders into. We need to quickly write an exception to see if this import bin cannot be found as like a just in case. So we need to say if not import bin, which is just saying if this is nothing, if it's nil, then we're gonna give it a print just saying, hey, error bin cannot be found. And we're just gonna return nil. This isn't really doing anything. We can just kind of just say return, because return, regardless of what we put after it, is going to cancel any action after this if loop or after this if statement. Anything that would have happened in this function after this is not going to happen anymore. Same thing that happened in the last function we just made. Now we need to do a bunch of different things that we're going to put all in one big chunk, because this is the resolve specific stuff. First things first, before we do anything, we have to set the current folder to the folder we want to put stuff in. Because, and this is going to make you cry, we can't specify a folder to import media into. When we import media, it just goes to whatever bin is currently open. So we have to activate that bin first, which means we have to call to media pool, set the current folder to where the import bin variable. We then need to get local files folders. We're gonna get just the actual folder name here so that we can make this into a bin. So we need to make another function, because we need to make a function that will get the final folder of a path. So of this path. So we need to make a function now called to get final folder. Way back up here to our helper functions below this function here. Let's make a new function for get final folder, and we're just gonna get it as a path. First thing I'm gonna do is normalize the path for different OSs. So different OSs can have different slashes in it. I mentioned this before, how Windows is really weird. We gotta normalize that. Basically, if there's a Windows slashes in the file path, convert to the other slash. So we're gonna get path, because path is a string. So normally you'd have to do string dot and then g sub. And then in here we can put down path, comma, and we can specify what we want to sub out, which we're gonna do double slash, and then we're gonna sub in forward slash. And this is how you would normally do it. But in Lua, there's a shorthand way. You can take out path from in there, change out the dot for a colon, and remove string and put path there. So this is the variable name of your path, and then it's the operation of gsub, and then what you're subbing, and then what you're subbing with. And there's a bunch of different operations you can do on strings. Gsub is just one of many, but also probably the most powerful. So we need to first remove if there is a slash at the very beginning. So if path colon sub, and this is using a different operation now. The sub is basically checking, in this case, it's giving us a true or false. If at this index, so if at the very first index, that's for some reason -1, we're gonna say if that is equal to a forward slash, since we normalized it, then we are going to say path, do a path sub from 1 to -2. And this is going to just remove any trailing slashes we have in our string. We then need to find the very last occurrence of the slash as well. So we're just going to do local last slash. We're going to set this equal to path match. This is going to give us the location, I believe. We're going to give it parentheses, and this is where we're going to get some interesting stuff happening with these operations. We're going to give it some quotes and then do dot star and then our forward slash. So what does this mean? This is essentially saying anything can be before this slash. I want if there's stuff before it and then a slash. And this is going to give us the very last slash of our path. Then we need to get the final folder from that. So we're going to do final folder is equal to, once again, path sub this time. We're going to do last slash, and then we're going to get the length. This is going to get us the length of the string, not the size of like the table like we did up here, how we did pound and then the table. This is giving us how many characters are in the string as a number. And then we're going to do +1. And this, shockingly enough, is going to return the final folder to us. Come on down back here, and after all these, we're just going to print a few of these variables to make sure that we're doing some things right and to help explain some of the things we've done so far. So we need to print. We're going to do import bin, but we're going to do get name just so we can see the raw name of the bin instead of seeing the data version of the bin. And then we're also going to do files folder. This should give us the name of our folder. And we're also going to print files. This is going to be a table, but to print files, we're going to do bmd.write string to turn it into a readable table. Put in our path. I have this folder full of film photos I took a while back. So we'll just choose that path and we can see it in here. We can't really move around in here, but if we drag around and highlight, we can move our view so we can still kind of see what's at the start. Let's go ahead and choose my bin. Let's also open up our console so we can see what we do here. We don't need to see any of that. And now if we press on start import, we're going to see we activate my bin because that's the bin that was found. And we have my bin as the bin that was activated. We have film photos as the file folder. So this is the folder that everything's stored inside that I chose when doing browse. And then this is all of the stuff inside of film photos, which it looks like nothing. So I wonder if we did something wrong there. But we'll come back to that here in a second. Let's continue on with this and just see what we can get out of this. Next up, we have to add that as a subfolder. Add subfolder, or in other words, add sub bin. We're gonna give it the bin we want to create this bin in, because we can do that with bins, but we can't import, footage into a specific bin. We have to get the media pool, get current bin, or I guess folder, get parentheses at the end of that, and that's going to give us the data version of the actual current folder, which is what we want. And we have to give the string name of the bin we want to create. So we're going to give it files folder, which is a string name of the folder that we just got the files from. We then want to create a local media pool items. This is going to import all of our items into the media pool all at once. And we're going to do media storage call with the operation of add items to media pool. And all we can do is put in the table name of the items. And now we have to set the current folder to the root folder to add the timeline now. So what we're doing is we are creating a bin. When we create the bin, that makes that bin the active bin. So it's going to just set our focus to that bin. And then we're going to import items to that active bin. And then what we want to do is move back out to the master bin and then create a timeline that's going to be placed in there, and then open it and add the images into there. So we're going to set current folder, we're going to do root bin, we're going to then do media pool, create timeline from clips. And as you can tell, this is designed for table of things. I bet you can probably guess it. MP items, media pool items right here, is a table of the data versions of the media pool items, which is exactly what we actually need. We can go ahead and put in media pool items, but before this, in the parentheses, we then want to get the timeline name. This is wanting to be the string of the actual name. So we're going to do item.tml, that's the ID of what we made up at the top, and .text, and then comma, and then the media pool item. And then we want to close the display once we're done. Once you press save on that, and let's run this, let's find our folder again, and let's choose, I'm going to choose the bin so we can iterate through into it. And we're going to create a timeline just for test timeline. And we're going to start the import, and we're going to see it's printed finished. Why is it printed finished? If you remember in the last video, at the very end of our script, after we tell the script to hide, we tell it to print finished. That will only happen after the user has exited the loop. We can see we have the film photos folder here, and it created the bin, but it didn't create the timeline or bring in the actual images. What's happening here? right after the user chooses this path, we want to convert this into the correct thing. Remember back to earlier in this video, I mentioned how Fusion has its own map path system. We can access that really easily with this. And there are different map paths per comp, app, different categories that we can set it to, but app is going to be where most of them are stored. So let's go ahead and do app, and we'll do map path, and that's all we have to do. We already have the parentheses from the toString. We just need to do app, map path, and that's going to give us the actual path form of that string now. And even if it is looking like this, if it does not have a shortened version, it will kind of just keep how it looks. It will only do this if it detects a map path that it has in its stored data. Go to our folder again, film photos, select it. If we scroll through here, we can see this is the full path now. It's not shorthand. If we browse again and go to something that doesn't have shorthand, like we'll just say this random desktop folder for edit, sure, it will still be the full name with no duplicates or errors or anything. It's just going to keep how it looks. Let's go back to downloads and import this folder of our images. So select folder. We'll give it a test timeline. Don't care about how it's spelled or capitalization. Start the import. We can see now we're loading a lot, and bam, we instantly get our timeline filled with all of these images. And there's like a set order that they come in at, depending on where they are in the files. So, or maybe it's depending on the names, I'm not sure. They were all brought into, if you look at that, they're brought into film photos in the master bin. They weren't brought into my bin, the bin. Okay, from what I can tell, I've done nothing wrong, but that test run was weird. So I just pasted in exactly what's in the example that I'm going to send off to you guys with some extra documentation, because this works. But if I undo this to what I just had before it, it's exactly the same code. So let me try running this and see if it works. If we were to run our tutorial file, go into our film photos, choose the bin and just give it test. Yeah, if we run it now, it works. So I don't know why that first test that we didn't work. I have zero clue. I didn't change anything. If you guys know what went wrong, let me know. I would love to find out what happened that made that so weird. Next week, we're finishing up our macro series, so stay tuned for that when we finish off building out it as an actual macro. We currently have all of our controls we were thinking about making, and then also anything that we want animated or as an effect for our user. Now we just need to put all of that as a macro for the edit page or Fusion page. Check out this video right over here to get introduced to this series, where we begin to go over some stuff for Lua. I go over some introduction stuff for Lua, and in the next video we go over the introduction stuff just for Resolve in general, and then we hop into this series. So if you want to learn about how we began learning about DaVinci Resolve scripting, check it out right over here. I'll see you there. Happy animating.